towards the end of his life, I saw him 3 times. I drove to Idaho to see him twice, and then once back here. And when I was in Idaho, he didn't tell me all that much, but he did tell me one interesting thing that never made sense until this year when I find out, you know, the information I'm getting is just growing exponentially. Every time I get someplace, you know, then I'm led to someplace else, and it's just so much information coming in. Anyway, what he told me was that he worked on a project, a mining machine for the moon. And this thing was being built in the south somewhere. He didn't tell me where, but, you know, I'm imagining Arkansas or Alabama, someplace like that. He said, John, this thing was so big. He said that when I finished it, he said, I have a private license. I rented an airplane just to go up and fly around to see how mammoth this thing was. And I said, well, can you give me an idea? He says, acres. I said, wow. I said, how'd they get it to the moon? He said, I don't know. And that's how projects like that work. He doesn't have a need to know how they got it to the moon. His job was to build it, you know, and they're not going to tell him any of that. That's how compartmentalization works.
So tell us how the moon got where it is, because you know that the moon is a satellite that's actually a fake.
Right. It's a spaceship. It was towed into orbit, I would say, 30 to 40,000 years ago. Now, the reason I say 30 to 40,000 years ago is because it's still within the history of man. Velikovsky talks about the different proselenes and the different civilizations that talked about the time when there was no moon, and then when there was 2 moons, and now we have 1 moon. This guy here, Norm Bergman, wrote The Ringmakers of Saturn. It's an excellent book. Norm Bergman is very qualified, was for 40 years a scientific part of both NACA and also Lockheed. Retired from Lockheed, I think, about 15 years ago. No,
What's
more than
NACA?
that. National Aeronautics, the predecessor to NASA.
Oh, really?
But when he retired, he somehow got some photos, some really good negatives of Voyager, which went by Saturn. And he's set up a little lab in his house, and he started looking these. And he ended up writing Ringmakers of Saturn, and what he shows you here is what he found in the rings of Saturn is 3 vehicles, spaceships, the biggest of which is 31,496 miles long and 2,422 miles in diameter. We're talking about a fairly large spaceship there. Now, Norm Bergman, when he wrote this book at the beginning, it's very good. He says, now look, he says, I'm going to be talking about some stuff that is very interesting, but you can't skip a page, you can't skip a word that you don't know. You have to go from the beginning to end, or you won't understand what I'm saying. And I did go from beginning to end. Now,
Okay, but when was this written?
This would be 1986.
Okay, so it's not that old.
No. And I go see Norm.
And it's talking about a huge spaceship.
In the ring of Saturn.
Spaceship?
Who built them?
Yeah.
We don't know who built them. But anyway,
Us?
no. We couldn't build anything like that. We have some amazing stuff, but we couldn't do that.
Okay.
No, this is somebody else. But what the interesting part in the book, and the reason why we're getting here, is because at the end of this book, he starts talking about the moon and how the moon was towed into orbit. Because the people that operate that stuff in Saturn and also Iapetus towed the moon into orbit. And he goes into here and explains exactly why he believes the moon was towed into orbit and how it was and how they grabbed on to the Mare Orientale.
Who are you saying towed the moon?
Whoever.
Into
We don't
place?
know.
So he doesn't conjecture on who,
No.
on what alien race, for example.
No.
I mean, obviously it's an alien race.
No.
Henry Deacon, our secret source, has also substantiated that the moon was towed into orbit. But have you got an idea what alien race was responsible for that?
No, absolutely not.
None.
So anyway, I go to see Norm 2 years ago, and in talking with him, I said, by the way, the electromagnetic vehicle that towed the moon into orbit, where is it now? And he said, I think it's on the backside of the moon. So when I got hooked up with Ron Schmidt, we started collecting photos on the backside of the moon, and we found it. It's in the crater Tchaikovsky. And the story of how we did it was so interesting, and how NASA covered it up. There's, like 6 different photos of Tchaikovsky as they tried to airbrush this electromagnetic vehicle out of the picture by making it an island. But we got them. And we got 2 really good photos. Anyway, one more thing I'm going to tell you about Norm, because we're going to get it into it. But anyway, let's see Norm, and he's not well, and he's had several surgeries, and I expect any day to hear that he's passed away. He's 87, and I said, Norm, I said, I'm thinking that the airplanes that crashed into the World Trade Center were holographs. And he said, John, you're probably right, and here's why. He said, just before I retired, I was driving down on the Bayshore Freeway to Sunnyvale, and he said, I had a friend in the right seat of the car, and he says, like it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe 8:15. He said, we're driving south, and we saw this shadow, and we looked up, and here, he says, it wasn't a 747, but it was a huge 4-engine airplane. It wasn't 200 feet above us. And he said, we looked out and looked at this thing, and he said, of course, we're, 20 miles from San Jose, and 30 miles from San Francisco. There's no possible way an airplane could, legitimately be flying right there. And he says, we watched it for about 10 seconds, and it went just like you turned a light bulb out. And he said, if that was the contemporary holograph, presentation of a holograph, he says, then you're right. And, the holographic technology is so far advanced that people just wouldn't believe it. But the other day I had a lady here that was helping Marilee on a casting program. Actually, she hired Marilee. She was from New York. She had 2 degrees from Harvard. She was just a wonderful, smart, receptive lady. And we were talking about holographs. She says, well, let me tell you. He said, about 5 years ago, I was invited with about 15 other television executives into a private showing in Hollywood. And there was a little auditorium. It wasn't very big. It could seat like maybe 30 people. And the presentation was called The Future of Television. And she said, I don't remember if Steven Spielberg was there, but, everybody else was. And she said it was, brightly lit. And there was a stage and a podium on the stage. And we're sitting there, and this guy comes out from behind, and he's a kind of East German accent, East European accent, white hair, has glasses, and he comes out and he starts telling us the history of television and how they came up with the first cathode ray tube, and how they did this and how they did that, and he walks down in front of the stage, walks up one of the aisles, he's polishing his glasses, walks back up to the stage, and she says it was pretty boring. She says after about 20 minutes, he wraps it up with something, and that's the history of television. He puts his glasses on, and just like a light.
He disappeared? He was a hologram?
Yeah.
Right. So can you take us through that? Take us through why you think that's true and how you got, you're a pilot. You certainly have, a vote in whether those planes had the capacity to hit those buildings, because our Henry Deacon has told us some very interesting things also about those planes. Actually, he thinks they were remote controlled. I don't know if that's true, but basically that planes don't have the ability to actually steer into buildings at that level. I'm not a pilot, so I don't understand the logistics. But how did you come around to this? Okay,
first of all, we're going to talk about Flight 11 and 77 didn't exist in the beginning. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics has no record of them taking off, has no, so let's forget about them because they did not exist. So now we're just talking about 175 and Flight 93. Flight 93 allegedly crashed at Shanksville. Anybody who has any background in accident investigation or any background at all can't possibly believe an airplane crashed. There was no wreckage. It just simply could not happen.
Okay.
As far as 175 into the South Tower, I just recently put in a call to Pan American flight simulator in Miami to see if I could rent a 767-200, which they have. And what I wanted to do was take 6 candidate pilots. One current and qualified in the 767-200, one maybe qualified but not current, and then one maybe current in a high-speed jet but not the 767, and then the last 3 the same currency as the alleged hijackers, like a couple hours in an Apache, a private license, maybe a commercial, something like that. And what I would do is in the simulator, you can take them up. That New York is just like it is. I mean, the buildings are there, and I would take them and freeze them in a position 20 miles out at 7,000 feet, at 560 miles an hour, put them in the seat, say, and then give them 2 minutes of looking at the horizons, show them where the World Trade Center is, and say, I'm about to release you. When I do, you'll have 1 minute and 50 seconds to hit dead center. Now, the World Trade Center is 220 feet wide. You got to hit to the center, not left or right, right to the center, and explain how it goes. Then I would have one camera pointing at the pilot and one camera pointing at what he's looking at.
All right.
And then say, go. And say, okay, now show me how easy this is, because all the guys on AT, I did that in Flight Simulator, no problem, It's impossible. At the height of my career, as proficient I was in every kind of airplane, there's no way I could have done that. I mean, it's just too complex. First of all, the airplane can't fly above 560 miles an hour. It can't fly more than 360, which is its velocity max operating. Maybe it could fly 30, 40 miles an hour faster than that, but at VMO, the clacker comes on. The clacker is an FAA-required safety device which clacks loud, and it clacks at a rate and a cycle that irritates the pilot so that he can't ignore it. He has to slow down, Now, there's no possibility a hijacker, first time in the airplane, is not only going to, fly it at 390 miles an hour, but do it with that clacker,
right.
And descend and hit that thing center. It can't happen,
I have a question here, if I may. We have a credible witness who says that the planes weren't piloted, but they were remotely controlled, like unmanned vehicles from thousands of miles away. And he said, yes, but I'm asking John to comment on that from the point of view that this also answers the question raised by the fact that no human pilot could have hit that small target.
No airplane crashed in the World Trade Center. First of all, remote controlling an airplane that size or any size is very difficult. And so I don't believe you could remote control an airplane the size of a 767-200 anyway, particularly to hit dead center of the World Trade Center. But the fact is there was no wreckage from any airplane in the World Trade Center. And by no wreckage, I mean nothing was found of any size anywhere around. Now, there was a panel of a fuselage that you see with 5 window shades, but when each airplane, American Airlines, the North Tower, and United Airlines, and the South Tower, hit, it was 2/5 of a second while they disappeared into the airplane. So in 2/5 of a second, you're not going to have a panel about 7 feet long drift down, and just be lying there in almost perfect condition, unless it was accompanied by Mohammed Atta's passport. The only other thing that was found was the engine on Murray Street, and the engine on Murray Street has been identified as either a CFM-56, CFM stands for Senecma, or the CF-6, which was a 767 engine, which was developed out of the CFM-56. But whichever one it was, the CF-6 or the CFM-56, it had to be General Electric. And unfortunately, or fortunately, United Airlines used strictly Pratt & Whitney. So that engine that you see flying off, and that engine they say is from 175, isn't from 175, because the guy's whose job was to dump it off there, in a smoking, smoldering thing, dumped off the wrong engine. There was a lot of things that the perps did that were suspect here. The collapse of building number 7 is just absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
And the reason they had to do it that way is because I suspect the holographic projector that projected Flight 175 and Flight 11 somehow became disabled, because Flight 93 was the one that was supposed to crash into Building 7. And when they couldn't do it, they had to do things quickly, make it fake 93 crashing in Shanksville, and I can imagine these guys all day long, what are we going to do? Nobody's going to believe this thing just collapsed, from a little fire. And about 5 o'clock, they said, well, let's go ahead and do it. Maybe no one will notice. So they collapsed this 47-story building, into its footprint, and expect everybody to believe it. And of course they did. Ron Blackburn, you know who he is?
No.
Do you know who he is?
No, I don't.
Ron Blackburn was with Lockheed for 30 years. He was with the stealth project up at Groom Lake for 20 years. He was the one that I first heard there was aliens at the test site. Now, when I first met him, 10, 15 years ago, he denied knowing everything. Now he's gotten a little bit more lax about what he says. I mean, he says, up at Groom Lake, there's an administration building, just for the aliens up there. Ron was at my birthday party here. So he's retired now.
We need to get to this guy as well.
He's retired. He's very careful about what he says.
Okay.
He still has retirement, but he came to my birthday party, and he told us about holographic projections. He says they contain sound, light, heat, everything. I mean, everything is there. One of the problems that people have with holographic projections, well, I saw it. It couldn't have been, they think of holographic projections like you see in Las Vegas or at a birthday party,
right,
where it's a little dancing light like
where
there.
You can see through it.
Yeah, and they
so
say, well, I saw it. Couldn't be. It's ridiculous. And then they say, well, how would they have done the sound? They would have had speakers all up and down, the street. It's too bad people, they don't really realize how far we are advanced with our technology. They were fooled. It was a scam. It was a psyop. And
okay, so who ran it?
Basically, I call them the nasty NASA Nazis and the military-industrial complex. And Hoagland tells us exactly who they are and how they took over. And that's who ran it. Now, in March 31st, 2007, last year, a guy named Morgan Reynolds, have you heard the name?
Yes.
Okay. Filed a suit called a quid-em complaint against these 22 companies. And we're talking about major companies here. Science Applications International Corporation, Applied Research, Hughes, all these companies right here are being sued. And what they're being sued for is accepting money for providing a government agency with fraudulent information. The government agency they provided with this fraudulent information was NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. NIST was asked by President Bush to determine exactly why the World Center collapsed. What actually caused it to collapse? And they came up with a reason that, the jet fuel, and it was just so far ridiculous that Morgan filed this suit, and it's 40 pages, and he outlines everything that they got wrong. And so the suit has been going along in court now.
And you testified as to the holographic planes as part of the suit, right?
Well, what I did is I filed an affidavit on January 28th, 2008, this year, in support of the complaint and in opposition to the motion to dismiss. And basically what I testified is, number one, why the airplanes couldn't have traveled as fast as they did, and how they couldn't be flown as well as they were, and why there was no wreckage in there. And I think this book...
Other pilots haven't come forward because this is...
Well, other pilots are employed. They can't afford to come forward. There's very few, people... There's a lot of...
But this is our country we're talking about,
They can't do it. A lot of my information was taken from aerodynamics for naval aviators, and I explained why an airplane cannot fly 500 miles at 1,000 feet. It has to do with drag, and it has to do with power, and it has to do with the fact that they use turbofans. It just cannot happen. So anyway, the governments and NIST contention that that they flew 500 miles an hour, it didn't happen. It couldn't happen. So basically, that's what I explained in my suit. Now, you say, why don't many pilots come forward? Many have. There's an organization called pilotsfortruth.com, and I'm a member, one of the earlier members of that. And there's a lot of people that realize that this couldn't have possibly happened. There is no an airplane like a Boeing 757 flying into the Pentagon. No, that didn't happen. April Gallup was a Army specialist, and I forget what her job was, but she had a top secret clearance. She was sitting about 40 feet from the where the explosion made the hole in the front of the Pentagon, and she had her 6-month-old son right below her desk, and she thought that was odd because usually when she went to work before going through security, they had to put the little kids in daycare, but on that day, security said, no, take the kid in with you. So she had it. She had the kid right below in his little holder there, and she says it was really strange because as she pressed the on button for her computer, that's when the building exploded. And she said a lot of debris came down on her, and she saw the hole over there, and she thought, I got to get out of here. So she picked up her kid, put it over his back, and went towards that opening. And she got through that opening onto the grass, which is where eventually triage was set up. But she said she saw no missile, saw no airplane, smelled no fuel. There was no airplane in there. And later in the hospital, she got interviewed by Army intelligence, and they asked her what she saw. And she started to say, I didn't see anything. And they said, no, yes, you did. You saw a Boeing 757 crash into there. And she says, no, I didn't. I mean, there was nothing there. And she's gone through hell for the last 4 or 5 years trying to get medical care. It's been a really very, very sad story. But one of the things I wanted to show, this is a page from a military manual talking about stuff that they would like to get in the year 2025. This is called Airborne Holographic Projector. You can see where I got it. You can't get it anymore here, but was www.au.af.mil. And I got about 250 pages of this stuff. But
it's talking about a hologram machine.
It refers to enemy perception management. Is that right? That's such a wonderful euphemism. Have I remembered that right?
Yeah, it says, brief description. The holographic projector plays a three-dimensional visual image in a desired location, removed from the display generator. The projector can be used for psychological operations and strategic perception management. It is also useful for optical deception and cloaking, providing a momentary distraction when engaging an unsophisticated adversary. And it has capabilities, precision projection of a three-dimensional visual images into a selected area, supports PSYOP and strategic deception management, and provides deception and cloaking against optical centers.
So, this is the new Samsung Mini Notebook. Ooh. And pretty colors, too. Huh? Oh. Hello.
Huh?
Well, hello, good morning, and thanks very much for coming.